The Cardinals got their trade deadline frenzy going on Wednesday by trading closer Ryan Helsley to the Mets. What did they get in return, and what do we think of the value the Cards received for their top trade asset, and what could be next for John Mozeliak's front office in the waning hours before the trade deadline? We'll talk about it all coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. I think I've spent more hours sitting at my computer and my microphone today than probably any day this year, but that's because action is happening. And so before bedtime on Wednesday night, July 30th, 2025, I want to get into the weeds on the Ryan Helsley trade, as the Cardinals have made landfall with their first move, really their first actual move of the trade deadline period. I am not counting trading Eric Fedde for nothing. Trading Eric Fedde for the right to not have to pay him his full salary as a trade. That's not really a trade. That's giving him away, and the Braves kicking in a little bit of the money that is owed to him. That's all that is. So we'll talk about the Helsley deal because that's a real trade. The Cardinals didn't maybe get what folks were hoping that they would get for Ryan Helsley, because the three prospects they picked up are all guys at high A. They're at A-ball. And they're probably a ways away from ever reaching the big leagues. And look, when there's that much distance between where they are now and where you're hoping to see them go, then oftentimes those guys don't end up making it to the big leagues. And so there's risk associated with the package the Cardinals received for Helsley today. But Nate Daum, Jesus Baez, and Frank Elizondo are the three players that the Cardinals picked up from the New York Mets for essentially what amounts to 2 months of Ryan Helsley. Yeah, 2+, because the Mets are going to likely be using him in the postseason as well. The Cardinals did not get Mick Abel, which was a pitching prospect that went from the Phillies to the Twins today for Jhoan Duran, who is an electric wipeout closer a la Ryan Helsley. The difference, though, well, there's a couple of them. And I think, unfortunately, the fact that this trade happened just 20 minutes or so before the news on Helsley broke on Wednesday afternoon and early evening, I think that kind of colored people's expectations, and then they were quickly shattered when we found out what the Cardinals were actually getting for Helsley, which is, and I'm going to have to keep repeating myself with it, it's not to say they didn't get enough or they didn't get a good haul for him. We just don't really know. And because of how far away those guys are that they picked up, high A level prospects, and only one in the top 10 for the Mets in their organizational rankings per MLB Pipeline. Jesus Baez was number 8 in their system and did, I believe, crack the top 100 according to Baseball America. Not sure about MLB Pipeline, but a good prospect for sure. Guy with upside. But when you're trading Ryan Helsley too, I think people were thinking, all right, if we're not going to get a Mick Abel, who goes to the Twins, and Duran, the differences are, I mean, the guy has had a better season than Helsley for one, but the bigger distinction is that he's got multiple years of team control remaining. I'll look it up exactly, but I don't believe he can become a free agent until after, it might even be after 2027. If it's not, after 2027, Duran becomes a free agent. So the Phillies, not only answered their question as to how they were going to replace their closer, Jose Alvarado, who's on the suspension list, whatever type of list that's called, for the 80-game suspension that he was popped for PEDs, meaning he cannot pitch in the postseason. That's the key there. They had to add somebody because that Alvarado is not available to you when you get to October. He has not yet returned from his 80-game suspension. Pretty soon, I think he'll be able to, but he can't pitch in the playoffs. So they knew they had a hole to fill at least this October, but they filled one with Duran for multiple years beyond that. That was not going to be the way that Ryan Helsley was perceived because he's a rental. He's a free agent to be. So Mick Abel was not a realistic return for Ryan Helsley. Duran and Helsley were in completely different boats, in different scenarios going into this July 31st trade deadline. That's number one. It's hard to kind of contextualize that, but it's reality that they, and again, sometimes, man, and I probably shouldn't let the negative stuff get me down, but there are times where, and we did the post-game show with STL Sports Central. Oh, by the way, Cardinals got shut out by the Marlins again today. We're hardly going to talk about the game because it was pitiful. I know that we're not supposed to say that, oh, they're not trying, or they. Let me start over. It's not that they're not trying, but when I say, all right, 2 shutouts in a row to the Marlins, you've been shut out by the Rockies for the first time they've done that to somebody in 220 games. It's kind of a trend. I mean, you got wiped out by the Pirates, didn't score in what, the whole series against Pittsburgh that happened a few weeks ago. This is not like, what are we supposed to say? I know that like Ollie Marmol and folks will take exception when you say, looks like they're just kind of rolling over. They're mailing it in at the plate against some of these guys. Cal Quantrill, are you kidding me? I mean, 2 nights in a row. I know Sandy's got a Cy Young pedigree, Sandy Alcantara, but he's been terrible this year. And the Cardinals made him look like the Cy Young form of himself. Cal Quantrill is not, God bless him, he's not a kind of guy that you tip your cap to. I'm not tipping my cap to Cal Quantrill, please. And so at a certain point, look, if they take exception to it, I always try to be very aware, because it's not like I'm just sitting here from my computer at home and badmouthing what's going on. I was at the ballpark last night. I wasn't there tonight. I can't be there every night. I do the post-game show for STL Sports Central, which requires me to be usually at home to be able to run it from my house. And so all those things are the case. But because I have an awareness of, the people behind all of this, I do try to be really careful. And I mentioned the negative comments on the Sports Central post game. These just couple of guys that, oh, this guy, he doesn't care. He's not going to hold anybody accountable. Just like the most brain dead stuff. And I saw one guy say he didn't grow up a Cardinal fan, so he doesn't care. It's like, well, no, I'm not currently a Cardinal fan. I cover the Cardinals. I try to be professional. But I was as big of a Cardinal fan as there was. But you know what? I have a professional bone in my body, and I try to use it. So when I think about games like this and series like this one where the Cardinals drop 2 or 3 to the Marlins and they get shut out in consecutive games, like, that is absolutely the type of stuff that would have pissed me off beyond belief back when I was in high school or early college days, or even, when I was a kid. And it would ruin my day. So I try to realize that y'all Cardinals fans out there are going through it. And I try to be intellectually honest with it. And that's part of the gig when you cover the Cardinals and you cover a team and you have to talk about the real things that are happening. But it's frustrating when people are like, oh, he's not going to tell it like it is. Because I think I do. I like to think that I do. But I also think that I have to contextualize and be like, look, these are human beings doing a job that's difficult and they're underperforming at it right now. But it doesn't make them bad people. That doesn't, some of the things that get said about players, about coaches, about managers, even about executives, it gets a little bit too personal sometimes. And so, yeah, if it comes off in a way that you feel there's a disconnect, it's because at times there is, because I'm aware of, kind of what goes into this. And when you're gonna lob a criticism, you better be ready to back that up. And really, you better be ready for the next time you see somebody to say, hey, I heard you were talking shit. That actually happened with me and Colton Wong a number of years ago, right? Because I'm tweeting. At the time, I lived in Texas, and so I'm tweeting about the Cardinals season. I think I said, this Cardinals team is just really mediocre. And that was probably in June. And I ended up covering some stuff later on that season. And Colton Wong, who was, I've told this story before, but that was a guy that I was a huge fan of. I loved his game. I loved, what he brought to the table, the energy, the clubhouse presence. And, his was generally a really good guy that would talk to you in terms of like media stuff. So I was a huge fan of his. And so I was like, oh man, I got sideways with Colton Wong. That's the last guy I want to get sideways with. And I remember asking him, I said, hey man, it was the next day after he had kind of said that. I said, hey, you got time for a couple of questions? He said, yeah, you're going to be cool, or you're going to talk? You're going to talk mess? And I said, what? What do you mean? And he said, no, don't worry about it. So we talked. And then the next day I said, hey, by the way, about yesterday, do you remember what it is that I said? And he said, no, I just remembered I saw something on Twitter that I didn't like. And you got to understand, this is a really difficult job, and kind of, leveled with me. And I respected that. But like even something as innocuous, I went back through my own Twitter feed. I said, certainly I wouldn't have said anything derogatory about Colton in particular. But I said, I think it was this tweet that one day in June, I said, man, this is just a mediocre team. And it blew up and it got a bunch of retweets and stuff. And so he probably caught wind of it. That was my best guess as to what it could have been. He didn't even remember himself, though. He just knew he was not happy with me. And so I tell all of this to say, like, man, it rubs me the wrong way sometimes when there's certain criticisms. And, like, it's okay if I get criticized, but I also want to be able to, when I got a microphone in front of me, send it back out and say, you know, there is some of this stuff that goes on behind the scenes. But this is my long-winded way of saying, like, I hesitate to use this phrase because I know that the weight that it carries, but it really looks like and feels like the Cardinals are kind of rolling over when you watch a game like tonight. Offensively, I'm talking. Like Miles Michaelis was pretty good tonight. Gave you what you needed. Bullpen was good. But they're just kind of going through the motions at the plate where it seems like you're up there, you're swinging, you're going to make some contact. It's not really going to be maybe as targeted. And look, I'm the idiot that's sitting at my computer screen talking about it. I'm not the guy that could, I've not been invited into the batter's box to be shown how difficult this actually is, but I have an idea, right? So I'm not sitting here pretending I could go out there and do it, but like that's where the disconnect is. These are humans that you're talking about, and so I always try to have that respect. I know this was not the Ryan Helsley trade talk that you were looking for, but sometimes I just have to vent and kind of think about it when it's like, man, try to entertain, try to inform, try to be, fair with criticism. But I feel you, Cardinals fans. Like it's bleak right now, and it doesn't necessarily look like it's going to be their year and that it's going to get better this year. The inconsistency of the offense it makes you want to pull your hair out. And when it happens against guys like Cal Quantrill, you don't want to hear it sugar-coated. And so I have to be real and say it looks like they're kind of going through the motions a little bit right now. That being said, could you understand if we're going to continue to harp on the human perspective of they just lost their closer and they know where this is heading and that they've put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears since getting to camp in February, and they're here and it's not yet August, and they know in their heart of hearts that it's probably not going to happen this year. So there's like a mourning period almost going on. That's my sense. Maybe they go out on the road trip and it sparks some new energy and we see a different version. But right now they're at 500. So it's you over a month, basically. End of June, they were 9 games over toward the late portion of June, and now they're right at 500. So it's been a bad July, and look, I think they need to trade off more pieces. It shouldn't just be Ryan Helsley. Get the value where you can. So it could ultimately get worse than it's been. But enough about my soapbox. Let's dive into the Ryan Helsley trade return. Nate Dome, I heard a Mets guy say Dome. I'll get the name right eventually. I'm trying to do my New York accent. But Nate Dome, Jesus Baez, Frank El Assault, those are the 3 guys you pick up. Baez was the highest ranked, and he's not even a pitcher, so that's a little frustrating. But maybe he's a guy with some real upside. I think he's coming off of an injury, or he recently has been dealing with an injury. But at high A, he's got a 740 OPS. Not injured. He is playing. Has been playing, pretty much all year. I don't know. I saw a Mets guy talk about an injury, and I don't think that's accurate. 740 OPS in high A for a 20-year-old. Like, he's playing at a level that's, probably a little bit young for the level that he's playing, which you always like to see, and he's holding his own. The on-base is good because he's drawing a lot of walks. 49 strikeouts and 293 plate appearances. Again, that's not a huge strikeout rate, so that's something else that you probably like to see. But this is a guy who's at high A, and he's a work in progress. If he sticks at shortstop, the longer he can do that, the more athletic I'll assume him to be when he gets to the big leagues eventually. And he's kind of the marquee name in this. And then you get a couple of arms. Dome was the 14th ranked prospect according to MLB Pipeline in the Mets system. Baez was 8th. I believe Baseball America had him at 5 in the Mets org, and he was top 100 according to Baseball America, top 100 in the sport. Nate Dome, not a top 100 prospect, 14th for the Mets. All 3 of these guys started the season in St. Lucie, were called up to Brooklyn, which is high A, and that's where they've been playing recently. We'll see where the Cardinals assign them, but probably all maybe slated to go to Peoria. Maybe one of them does get bumped up to Double A. We'll see. That'll depend on maybe what else happens here over the next day or so. But I'm looking at Nate Dome. He's a pitcher with 62 innings across the 2 levels this year, a 2.87 ERA. He's started all but one game, but maybe he profiles as a future reliever. 77 strikeouts in 62 innings. I saw Kyle Reese, I believe, talking about him as a guy that could, if he maybe does become a quicker riser, I could see that being maybe as a bullpen arm. And he's a 22-year-old playing in his 22-year-old season. Will turn 23 in January. Frank Ellisalt, the other pitcher they picked up, was a late-round pick in the 2024 draft, the 19th round of Nova Southeastern University, which I believe I saw someone mention the same school as Miles Michaelis attended, which is correct. He was drafted in the 7th round out of that university in 2009. Cardinals get Frank Ellisalt, the 19th round 2024 draft. He's 23 years old, pitched a bunch in college. And again, another guy, and like the same thing with Dome, it's like they're at a level that is kind of lower than. With a 20-year-old shortstop, you're like, okay, he's younger than the level he's playing at. But by the time you get to 22, you're approaching 23, and in Ellisalt's case, he is 23. These guys are kind of older than the level that they're playing at. And so the numbers, you kind of have to take with a grain of salt a little bit because you need to see him against better competition. But I will say, that's exactly the profile that fit Matt Swanson when the Cardinals acquired him for Paul DeJong a couple of summers ago. He was at high A, but was a little bit old for the level. Well, now we're seeing him contribute to the big leagues, and so it's not to say that these guys cannot do that. But trading, for 3 Matt Swansons is kind of the way that it feels. I don't think that's right. Maybe a couple Matt Swansons in terms of the pitching side of it, and even then, Swanson was a reliever at the time at high A when the Cardinals picked him up 2 years ago. These guys are at least starters at this point. Maybe they switch it up at some point, or actually, excuse me. Ellisalt is not a starter. He started 7 out of the 18 games he pitched this year with St. Louis. With Brooklyn, he's pitched in 2 games, both as a kind of bulk reliever, it appears. But like that being the return for Helsley, it's different than like a struggling Paul DeJong. So people are understandably upset with the return. It wasn't going to be what they got for Duran in Minnesota. A guy like Mick Abel, who if he had been acquired by the Cardinals, he would be showing up to, at the latest, February of 2026, spring training, Jupiter, Florida, looking to win a rotation spot. More likely than not, he would be plugged in at some point this year to the Cardinal rotation. He's got some big league experience already, but the Cardinals weren't getting that guy for a rental. It's an unfortunate reality of where they were, and look where Helsley was, too. It's not like he is the top reliever on the market. He's had a good season, not a great one. If he was being traded off of the type of year that he had last year, or like if you did it last July, which they were in the mix, so they weren't going to do that, you might be looking at it a little bit differently. I don't believe they should have done it in November, December, or January because I don't think the offseason is really the best time to get value for relievers. I think the best time to get value for relievers is right now when the teams are desperate and they know they're in it. Relief pitching is like, if you're not a good team, you don't really need to bother with a bullpen because if you're not contending, who cares? It's going to suck, but you're going to lose a lot of games anyway. If you know in July that you're contending and you have a chance to win the World Series, that's when you bulk up. That's when you stock up on relief pitching. And so the Mets, one of the teams that's doing that. But the Cardinals just weren't going to get necessarily the Mick Abel type of prospect. But we don't really know what was afforded to them. Were they talking with the Phillies about Abel? And then the Phillies said, we'll send him for Duran. We just don't want to send him for a rental. And then that move happens with the Twins. And 20 minutes later, the Helsley deal is done. I don't consider that to be a coincidence. I'm not giving you insider info. I wasn't at the ballpark. I haven't talked to anybody about it to know. I've been doing shows all day. But like I could see that being something that you connect some dots and it makes some sense. That being said, we don't know. Like if the Cardinals were panicky because, the Phillies are off the board and we thought we could land Helsley with them, we better take this deal from the Mets because we don't want to run out of chairs when the music stops, right? So there's an aspect of that could have played into this. How much is Chaim Bloom versus John Mozeliak running this deadline? We really don't know, but I, again, am going to follow what's been reported by the on-the-job everyday beat writers that are there every day at the ballpark, like Katie Wu, that said, it's Mo's deadline. So maybe Chaim was consulted. I'd like to think that he was when it comes to A-ball prospects that aren't going to be around until maybe 2027 at the earliest. Yeah, I'd like to think that the guy that's going to be in charge of the organization then got to at least have some input on who they would pick up and who they would get. But you had to move Helsley to get value, and they've done that. You must do it with Maton. I know that you're going to talk about depleting the bullpen for sure, but you got to do it, in my opinion, with JoJo Romero as well, a guy who's not a rental. If teams like the Padres are calling on him, you get a legit piece because he does have another year of team control, and maybe you don't have to, with a guy like him, water down the return, which is not to say that they're not good prospects the Cardinals got. Time will tell. But just based on what we know about them on paper and what we know about them from an archetype standpoint, it feels like the Cardinals kind of got quantity over quality in this deal, or like the riskier quality because it's younger players or players that have not been proven at a higher level of the minors. And so you don't have there's a lot of gaps between now and the big leagues that they're going to have to be able to clear the hurdles for before they can really become bona fide prospects or big league players. And when that's the case, there's, of course, more risk associated with the trade package. If the Cardinals had gotten one AAA pitcher or one AA pitcher who's 23 years old and like is on the way within the next year or so, next calendar year, I think people feel better about it because they can at least say, all right, we're staking Ryan Helsley's trade value to something that feels more tangible because it's closer to being realized rather than, yeah, we got these three kids that we haven't really seen them even at AA yet, but we'll see. Like, that was your best trade chip. If it was Maton that you traded for some lottery tickets for, and again, I might be underselling it. I don't know anything about these guys. I'm not going to pretend to you that I had the scouting report before today on any of the three of them. I did watch a video from a New York Mets blogger, guy who covers the minors, that was pretty interesting. He was kind of sad to see some of these prospects go, but is obviously excited to see the Mets legit going for it with all the moves that they're making. So there's two sides to every coin. But I look at it and say, man, if you had gotten something like this or a couple of these kind of guys for Maton, which it wasn't going to be with the Mets because they had him last year and he just didn't perform in the playoffs, and so they probably weren't interested. But that would be a different story. But with the Helsley deal coming first, we feel like we've saved the best for first, and that anything that's to come is not as exciting. That's the narrative. That's maybe the way that it feels right now. And if that's how you feel, I can't say you're necessarily wrong because I don't think they're necessarily getting more value for Maton than they did Helsley. And stylistically, they've chosen to take a prospect package that's three guys, less proven, further from the big leagues, in some cases not even that young for the level that they've played at, and so there's risk there. Rather than say, no, we're going to hold to that we want a AA pitcher because we want to let our fan base know that, like, at least we picked up somebody that when he comes to spring training next year, he's going to be invited to big league camp and he's going to be vying for that Memphis rotation or beyond. And, we're really excited about this piece that we got. We hated that we had to trade Helsley, but it had to be done because we're trying to move this organization forward. We weren't going to sign him. We needed to get something for him. Well, they did. They just didn't get anything for him that we're going to see next year, I don't believe. So let me know your thoughts on it, Cardinals fans. Let me know what you think should come next. To me, Maton will be dealt. If he's not, it makes no freaking sense. Like, especially if you've already shown a willingness to take just, A-ball prospects for Ryan Helsley, your best asset, whatever you can get for Maton, it might not be a deal that people are over the moon about when it happens because it's going to feel very similar and probably smaller in scale to the Helsley one. But at least we've shown that, all right, they're willing to do that, and so it means they'll do it with Maton too. I think JoJo should be dealt as well because from what I have heard, there is enough interest around the game in him that the Cardinals need to come to grips with the fact that his value is never going to be higher. And frankly, they're not operating right now. I'll give Chaim Bloom time, but right now they're not operating like an organization that I expect to be balls to the wall, pedal to the metal for 2026, trying to contend in this division. Everybody's kind of getting better around you. The Brewers, the Cubs, the Reds are even trading for Brian Hayes within the division. The Pirates are still pirating, but they do have Skeens. They'll get Jared Jones back. They might have a better rotation next year to be able to maybe make some noise as well. With where the Cardinals sit, it's a start to trade Helsley and get something for him. Are we going to see any of these guys at the big league level? If not, that's that's going to feel a certain way. But there's the ways to go as well. Time to make some more trades. Definitely of these rental relievers. Matz is the one that I say you could hold on to. I could understand it because you do need enough innings to get through the season, and he could be stretched back out if you need to with pitching injuries to your rotation. John King goes on the IL today with the oblique that he dealt with last night. I meant to mention it in the postgame or in the b-schaeff daily, and I neglected to do so. But we knew it was going to be an IL stint for oblique because if you're watching the broadcast, you watched him and you could read his lips. He said oblique. He felt it go. Hoped it wouldn't be too severe. Maybe it'll be a shorter stint, but obliques rarely are. But he's the first pitcher on the season for the Cardinals, the regular season, to go on the injured list. First major league pitcher. So they've been pretty healthy, but yet it feels like the wheels are kind of falling off. That's going to do it, though, for this edition of the show. I do apologize that I'm not going to be able to dive into Down on the Farm tonight. I seriously have done probably 8 shows today, and I am wiped. 8 a.m. tomorrow, you might already be listening to this. Jump on over to the STL Sports Central. Pause this podcast. Jump over to the STL Sports Central YouTube page. 8 a.m., I'll be talking with Joe Roderick for more trade deadline stuff live, so you can let your questions be heard, and we'll answer them there for about 30 minutes at 8 a.m. on Thursday. That's going to do it, though, for this edition of the show. I am traveling to San Francisco later on in the day on Thursday, and going to be spending some time out there with some friends and my family. So we'll see. If anything else big happens, I'll probably still do something Thursday night. And actually, I'll do it right now because the Cardinals just traded Steven Matz in the middle of me recording this video. I literally, like I said, I'm not going to have a voice tomorrow, but I'm seeing now, right as I was getting ready to post this, Steven Matz is being traded to the Boston Red Sox, according to Jeff Passan, and they finally did it. The Cardinals finally brought Blaze Jordan home. This is a name I feel like I've been hearing about for a number of years, but he's putting together some solid numbers this season in the minor leagues. Formerly a third-round pick in the 2020 draft, was drafted out of high school. Very similar to, you think about Jordan Walker and Mason Wynn, Tink Hens from that same draft class. Blaze Jordan went a little bit later, and this is a guy that you actually could see a little bit sooner rather than later, potentially. And, not a humongous power bat, but has had a pretty good run right now in AAA, where he has posted a 289 average, a 333 on base, and a 476 slug for an 809 OPS after being called up from AA earlier this season, where he OPS'd 928. He's got 6 home runs in 177 plate appearances at AAA. He had 6 home runs in 176 plate appearances in AA. So, I don't know. This is actually kind of intriguing. This is kind of what people wanted to see for Helsley, get a few guys like this that people have heard of, that they know about, and that they think might be able to do something for them. Time will certainly tell. I'll have more on Blaze Jordan, more on Steven Matz. This is the very end of the podcast, and so I let this be the appetizer for the more to come. I have to quit and post this. Appreciate you guys. Please stick with me. We'll have more content for you coming between here and STL Sports Central. Talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.